Hi, Evie. Thank you for joining us today at Panusi & Co. to talk about product management. And I know that you were a senior product manager for Booking.com, and then you went on to do other things. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourself to our audience.
Yes, I will. No, it's a pleasure to be here. I know that obviously we connected a few weeks ago now, but we know that we'd have a great conversation about product things. So here we are. So yeah, I was previously a senior product manager at Booking.com. I worked there for 4 years and progressed from being a PM all the way through to a senior PM, and looked after a whole host of teams to help make sure we could re-platform and take our cars vertical for Booking.com forward. So that was really cool. That's where I basically learned how to do product really, really well. If anyone wants to work for an organization where they understand how to do that properly, Booking.com is a great place to be. And since then, I started my own business, and I've worked with a range of clients across Europe and across the US to help them through teaching them best product practices and making sure that they can excel. And I mostly do that through consulting and coaching now.
That's cool. So what do you think is the most thing that's underestimated in product strategy? Because you've said like you've learned how to do product well. What is good practice that you think is not maybe always met in the industry or kind of underestimated?
Yeah, I think at an overall product strategy level, there are so many companies that just don't have one. And I see this with so many organizations that I work with. And a lot of what we do is we unpick the gaps and say, okay, you're experiencing all of these product problems on the ground. And you think that might be because you've got too many meetings in your diary, you don't have enough time, you don't have data, you can't do customer research. And all of those things are true. But sometimes we're all running around like headless chickens because we don't have a strategy. So everyone's busy doing things, but it's not necessarily the things that are going to add value. And creating a good product strategy helps you to say, hey, we've got this overall company goal and mission. But to achieve that, we know that we want to focus in these 5 areas, which might be a case of saying that we want to expand into the Asian market. Or it might be saying we actually really want to grow a new product that serves X customer segment. And if you can identify those things and where you want to operate as a business, it allows your product teams to set themselves up effectively to help achieve those goals, as opposed to just doing willy-nilly things that they can maybe contribute to on the ground.
And then how do you, I guess, what if you're in a team and you obviously don't want to just to pump out a feature for the sake of it, but they've just cut your funding for user research? Then how would you do your own research and communicate that if you don't have resource capacity for that? It's a very
Such a good
specific
question.
question.
Yeah, but I feel like there's a
Well,
lot
that's
of people.
worst case scenarios.
But there's a lot of people that end up in that boat, right? It's like not an uncommon scenario. It's like, I'm sure
Yeah.
every product person will be able to sit there and say, oh yeah, I've been in that situation before. So worst case, but we need to be prepared for those. No, I mean, again, this depends. So if you've already done a bunch of research in the past, and if you already have access to data and insight, there's so much that you can already lean on to help you to decide as to like how that feature should be built, or if that feature is the right thing to do. If you don't have all of that backed up and you're starting in a team that doesn't have any of that insight, then it's all about how can you go out and find that insight in the cheapest way possible, which might be using your own time and working out how you can carve out time to delegate to that thing. And there's so much that I've done when I've been a PM. We've done things from like guerrilla marketing when I worked for a travel company and we were around the corner from an airport, and we went to the airport ourselves and just chatted to people that might be waiting for someone to come back on a flight and asked them a few questions and tested out prototypes that way. So there's loads of things you can do without necessarily needing to spend money, but it's all about knowing who your customer is and going out and finding the best ways to have conversations with them, which can be surveys that you send out to people you know, or it can be conversations with people you know that might be using that kind of thing. So there's a million different ways. There's no reason to be put off, but often it's the time that people don't have available to spend on those things.
I love that. I love that you kind of use like a hands-on approach. What have you ever had a time in your career where you had to communicate that approach to the stakeholders and they didn't really see value in user research? Sounds like I'm really into user research.
Yeah, are you? You can throw in any
Am
expertise
I?
if you have it too.
I just used to work at user Zoom, and I just found that when I was communicating to a lot of C-level people at enterprise level, very famous companies, I was just very surprised to find out that sometimes they would be working from legacy, and instead of maybe using user research and being more customer centric, they were actually asking the developers what they should do. So it was completely the other way around. Because they were just still working on old software, and they were like, oh, we don't want to break the whole system down. And I was like, but it's 2022, guys. So
And again, right, these are some things that
yeah.
like you talk about and people will be like, as if that still happens. No, that still happens so often. And the other thing that I find a lot with user research is people wanting to quantify things. So you've gone out and done some research and you've got some insights that basically help to inform what you might do. But every customer is different. Everyone's got a different view as to what the most important thing is or how they like to operate. So it's not about taking user research as a complete gospel and saying, well, 6 customers said this, so we're going to do this. It's not the same as quantitative research. It's all about using that user research to actually understand more about your customer and understand more about common patterns or common pain points that allow you to do the right thing. And even user Zoom is an interesting example because, yes, you can do some statistical stuff on there, but it's mostly about trying to find common patterns, and then you still use your own initiative to understand the best way to solve that problem. And yeah, you'll get a lot of people that sit in the C-suite that say, well, this is a waste of time, we just want to get things done. And that applies to anything to do with data sometimes. Like, yes, they want that to make sure they're moving in the right direction, but then they want to move in that right direction as quickly as possible. And if you're not testing and learning and saying, well, this was successful, that wasn't successful, you can deliver anything and people at a higher level are happy because you've delivered something. But that doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. So the only real way to get buy-in from the C-suite is to be not just saying, hey, we want to do some research, but proving how if you've used some of that research, you created a better outcome off the back of it, because that's ultimately what they care about, which isn't a quick do this tomorrow thing. But what you can start doing is showcasing how you might have gone in one direction, but you changed your mind and then you delivered this thing that was successful, and take your user research to say, hey, we've identified this new opportunity and therefore we did this thing. So sometimes it's the chicken and egg behind how do you prove value to then get buy-in.
And how do you evaluate, I guess, the success of strategy? Because, for example, I was speaking to my dad, and he works for Forrester Business Research. So he designs IT infrastructure for financial services. And I graduated in brand management. And as I started working for advertising agencies, I was like, ooh, they have a digital strategy. And he was like, there's no such thing as a digital strategy. There's just a strategy, for example, like in marketing, and then that could be part of it. How do you, I guess, determine the success of product strategy so that it ties in with the overall company strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question, because again, this is something that I think people skip. And I see product strategy in 2 ways. You can either have a business strategy and then say you own one product. So for example, your product might be the app, and then you might have a strategy for that product specifically. Or you might have an organizational wide strategy that covers all of your different products. If you have that organizational wide one, the way it maps to your business strategy is it says, hey, this is what we want to achieve as a business. To do that, this is digitally what our products can do to help enable those things. And that might mean that you've got this overall business strategy and product need to do this element and marketing needs to do this element, and those things need to be aligned. So it's not as simple as just saying we work in isolation. It's basically taking it just one step down from what you're saying you want to do overall as a business and saying, well, this is what we can achieve overall at a product level to help reach those goals. And this is who we need to coordinate with. How you prove the success of that is often in saying and setting yourselves goals. So I use this triangle, which I can send you afterwards. But if you look at your overall vision, you've got a North Star metric, which your business wants to achieve overall. You might have a product North Star metric that might map to that business North Star metric, or the business might have one, you might just have one in product. And then beyond that, you have a strategy. And beyond that, you can set yourself OKRs and say, well, these are our goals. And even in your strategy, ideally, you'd have SMART goals. So you'd say, within the next 3 years, we want to achieve X% profit increase in the Asian market. And that's when you'll know you're successful, is if you've managed to achieve that and if that's mapped to your business bottom line. So it's not a short term, we see this overnight, but if you can follow that kind of trickling waterfalls, that then means that your teams are aligning themselves to reach that ladder upwards, that's eventually when you'll know you've been successful.
Cool.
So yeah,
Please
I
send me
think
the
that's kind of
triangle
right,
thing.
but
I
it's
will
about
try it.
making it all work.
Yeah, and then another thing is, so we had because I'm thinking we met at an event when you gave a talk and I was listening, and we had a previous guest who is an MIT grad, and I think he has like a technical background, and he said that he started doing product way back in the day. So he makes comparisons between old school of product and new school of product. And you were talking about how the industry is talking about the decline of product managers, but in fact, that's not really accurate. Could you just like touch upon that and expand?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I think in some regions and in terms of the economic climate overall, people have seen a growth of roles available. People have got less spending, which means less money being spent on digital products to build them. So there is a sort of pattern where there are less active roles available. But actually, overall, all that's happening is there's an economic shift and products still in popular demand. And actually, people might just be shifting the way that they advertise for product roles and combining product roles with other areas, as we're seeing at Airbnb, where they combined product management and product marketing. So overall, we kind of went on this journey from saying, okay, we want teams to be agile. And by saying we want teams to be agile, that meant, according to the Scrum definition, that every team should have a product owner. And then product owners evolved into product managers who were doing more than just managing the backlog, but they were also understanding, what does the business want to achieve? How do we plug that gap with strategy? How do we understand what our customer wants, what their opportunities are, what their pain points are? And this role became something bigger than just being a product owner managing a backlog. I'm not saying that's just what product owners do, but for simplicity's sake. And now it's kind of continuing to expand again to say, well, actually, where do product people add value? And that is usually in that gap between what we're trying to achieve overall for the business and for the customer and what we can actually deliver. And also in that gap between how do we work across different departments. So if we want to achieve X in our product strategy, what does that mean we need to do from a marketing point of view? What does that mean we need to do from a commercial point of view? How do we get these people together to have those conversations and do the right thing across the business? So it's more that I would say that maybe this is a new school that your previous guest spoke about, but maybe it's the next new school, is that it's going even more into that level where it's more of a hybrid role across the whole business that can pull all of the right things together to make products successful.
That's cool. What do you think makes a good product owner and a good product manager? Because I think they're slightly two different roles, but there are points where they overlap, but I think they're often confused.
Yeah, and everyone's got their own definition of it, so it's never an easy one. For me, a product owner is that person that really is sat in the team. So they're doing the traditional product roles, which is saying, okay, how do we specifically deliver this certain feature? How do we solve this specific problem? And it's not thinking as long term and it's not thinking as broad. But it's getting into the nitty gritty on the detail. It's working really closely with the team to make sure things are well executed. It's making sure that the team is working on the most important thing next. So it really has a place to mean that that team can really gel and operate effectively, and that it's more focused in the delivery space to mean that things are executed on well. But from a product manager point of view, it's taking a step back and just spending more time looking a bit more long term to say, okay, well, what problems do we actually want to solve? What do we know about our customer? What opportunities do they want us to work on that mean that we'll be the best in market at this thing? And therefore, we want to focus on these areas. And again, like I say, how does that align to what the business is trying to achieve? And then if there's a hybrid between those two roles, you're obviously trying to spend enough time working in the long-term thinking, understanding the customer, understanding the business space, but also, well, what does that actually look like in terms of a solution? How do we execute on that? How do we test it? How do we get the data? And how do we know that was the right thing to do? So yeah, I mean, this is what I'll always say, and we can talk about product management careers, is there's a whole spectrum of things that you can work on. So it's like, okay, where do I want to operate and where will I be the most successful?
And then, so I know that you've mentioned that you do have a framework that you go by, which is the triangle. But so I know that for a product manager, prioritization is top line responsibility. So do you go by a certain framework apart from the triangle to, for example, differentiate? So let's, for example, you have a new feature, and which is like your cash cow, and it's which is kind of like which I guess is also fixing like a UX problem that generates a lot of support calls. Or would you then prioritize, for example, adding an enhancement that your top salesman swears by, which will close many deals and add functionality which your main competitor already has? Like, what if like a person is just starting out and they have to decide what they need to do? And I know the answer is probably go with the strategy, but I guess how do you get from, oh my God, I have to do this and I have so many hours in the day, to, okay, I know what the strategy is. How would you get from point A to B? Like, what's your
Yeah,
thought process?
I agree, because it
I
can
want to know
sound
your
so
thought
simple.
process.
Yeah, like tell me exactly. This is an interview question now. Because it can, and honestly, it's like that simple
Yeah,
answer of
yeah, this
like,
is interrogation.
yeah, honestly, like, let me see if she actually knows product. But it is, because like, those vague answers of like, well, see what fits with your strategy. Well, that's like you say, for a PM that's new, that's on the ground, it's like, they both are good ideas. And in product, we're like, well, we want to do everything, and that's half of the problem. Like, we can't. So yeah, right. I'm again, I'm like, there's so many diagrams that I should send you afterwards. And I also need a better name for the triangle. But in this instance, for example, if you take those two features, then usually I use the strategy for a tick box, should I even assess this idea or not? So if you have a strategy and your strategy doesn't care about reducing call volumes, that's not on the list, well, then that idea doesn't fit that checkbox of saying it's even something we should consider. So the strategy is more of a filter at that point. And then obviously you've got your OKRs, and hopefully you've got your team OKRs. So if you've got the right product set up, that's the process I'd follow. And if you're looking at your OKRs, you might have set yourselves goals for that quarter that are more focused on increasing sales, or they might be more focused on decreasing costs. So depending on where your OKRs are focused, which is a bit closer to home than your strategy, that can help you decide which one of those is the top priority. If both of those are OKRs, they're both things that you're focusing on, then you get down to the level of saying, or if you've got two ideas that achieve the same goal, then you get down towards more of a prioritization matrix. And there's different ways that you can do that. So it might be that you can easily pull data on those two things and you can put a cost against them. So if you might reduce call volumes by 10% and you know how much each call costs you, you can put a monetary value on that feature. And if this feature that the salesperson swears by, they think will guarantee 3 new customers, that might be a monetary value on that. And then you might be able to do a direct comparison. Obviously, these are all guesstimations, and if someone's trying to make you prioritize that feature, they'll promise you 10 new customers. So you need to have a really good working relationship with those different departments and be able to ruthlessly get the right information yourself. But that direct comparison, if you can put costs against things, can help. If you can't do that, or if it's like a bit more broad and vague, then I get to the point where you'll use things like a RICE framework, so reach, impact, confidence, effort, or any variation of the acronym that you want to use. And then you can start to put your features down and say, well, how many people are going to use this? How many people will it affect? What's the size of the impact? Do we think it's going to be a minor change that people won't really notice and won't really add much value? Or is this actually transformational and it will really increase our sales by a lot? Your confidence behind that. So how much evidence do you have? And what's the effort? Is it a tiny change that the developers need to make, or is it something that's going to take you 6 weeks? And then that combination of factors comes up with a score, and you don't have to input all of those variables. You might be able to do something simple like high level, say, impact effort. But that's what really helps when you get down to that specific feature and idea level. And last point on that is, even if someone's coming to me and saying, hey, I've got this feature, can you please prioritize it? What I usually try to do with them is not just talk about the feature, but map back up to the outcome that they want to achieve and the impact that that will have. And that then allows you to say, yeah, okay, I understand that we have an opportunity in this space to make some sort of change to reduce call volumes, but the idea that that stakeholder came up with might not be the best idea to achieve that. Internally in your team, or with your research or UX or anyone else, or even the people in the call center, you might be able to come up with ideas that are more likely to execute that goal that the stakeholder wants. So you try to move away from the specific features that people come to you with and come up with the best way to solve the problem that they want to be solved.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I love the fact that you've mentioned you have to have a good relationship to get really good information. I'm like, I don't think that would be a problem. Interrogation.
Yeah, you're like,
And I
really?
see clients, yeah, when I speak to clients at work, my manager's like, Suna, maybe we could, validate what they're saying, in between questions. Like, I can try.
And then you're literally like, if someone was like, yeah, you'll get 3 new sales from this, you can guarantee that within 3 months, you're like, where are my 3 sales? You promised me 3 customers. And they're like, sorry, won't lie to you again.
Okay, I have another question.
Fire away. I'm like, I'm not sure if I'm ready for this. I need a breath and some water.
So do you need a glass of water?
No, I'm joking.
Okay. So how would you evaluate the impact of what, for example, you would be able to achieve in 90 days? So obviously, let's say like you've got experience like behind you and you're like known in the industry and you're invited to give talks. But what if it's somebody who's like starting out and they want to promote themselves as somebody that adds obviously value? How would you kind of advise them for them to evaluate the impact of what they would be able to achieve within the first 90 days? And I guess what framework would you use to evaluate that? And then how would you communicate that when you, for example, just go into the new role?
Cool. So this is someone that's working internally in a new company or a new space.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So if you're a new PM, whether that's new to a company, new to a new role, or just new to product management in general, the most important thing to do when you start is to sit down and understand what is expected from you, because
Mm-hmm.
that's how you're going to demonstrate your impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have some control over that as well, especially if it's not your first product role, to be having that conversation with your manager in the first week and be saying, okay, what would success look like for you if I integrate into this role in the first 90 days? And then you can also say that for yourself. If you've taken a role, you know what you want to achieve from that. So you're like, okay, well, like success for me is meaning that I wanted to get more experience in customer research, or I wanted to make sure that I could ship a huge feature in my first 90 days. So if you've got those things clear from both sides, and if you've had that coordinated conversation, that's kind of your own OKRs, your own metrics, your own goals that you can set. And then all I do with that is make sure that I have a plan that means that I'm going to be able to execute against that. So month 1 might just be a case of understanding the business and getting to know people and making sure that you understand the customer and the customer problems and how all the departments work. And sorry, I've got Siri speaking to me. Okay, it's gone. and then beyond that, you might be looking at month 2 and month 3, which is where you're more likely to have impact. And at the end of each month, make sure you're checking in with your manager and you're having that conversation against that framework and those goals that you set out for yourself and saying, hey, are these still the most important things? How do you think I'm doing against some of these? Where do you think I could improve? And make sure you're constantly feeding into that developmental conversation, because you don't want to get to the end of month 3 and then realize you've veered off track or actually expectations changed. Because people set expectations at the start, but then once they know what you're capable of, their perception of what you can achieve is completely different. So yeah, keep checking in, and then hopefully at the end of that 90 days, you'll have been able to say, like, here's the evidence, here's what I achieved. Oh, I didn't quite do this, but this is why. And you've got your reasons behind it. And that's usually how I try and focus people.
Cool. What if I, on the other side, am being interviewed by Evie?
Yes.
What would Evie, I love your name, it's so cute. It reminds me of Wally and Evie. you
Oh,
know,
I usually
somewhere.
get the Pokemon. It's usually like, oh, what would you love to evolve into? And I'm like, to be fair, at least I got a cute Pokemon. I'd be sad if it was like an ugly one.
Yeah, so what if I am being interviewed by Evie? I'm gonna say it out loud again. And for a role, what would you look for me as the interviewer to make sure like this is the person that would definitely make an impact? Like
Cool.
what questions would you ask?
Yeah. So usually the questions, I mean, obviously the role completely depends on what product you're trying to deliver, what kind of company you work for, etc., etc. So I won't talk about the specific skills necessarily, but the overall traits of a product manager.
Hmm.
And a lot of what I look for in people is evidence that they've done things in the past. And that doesn't mean that you have to have operated at that level before, but it means that you've tried to get involved in the things that you know are going to develop your career. So using your initiative and taking ownership of different areas. And then beyond that, the things that I look for in people, and this is what applies to every product person, is your ability to reflect on your own performance and work out where you want to improve and be that kind of self-starter, that proactive person. So if you can demonstrate, no matter what problem you've looked at, that you've been able to sit, you've been able to understand the problem, and you've been able to put a process in place to try and make an improvement, you can take that same kind of technique and apply it to any areas of product. So yeah, traits wise, they're the values and the ways of working that I'd like people to be able to demonstrate.
Cool. I think that's something that my dad actually taught me when I was little. He would be like, it's all about your attitude. And I think as you go and watch people who excel in their careers, Evie,
Thanks.
or maybe don't, I think it is definitely resilience, and it does come down to the attitude. So
Yeah,
it
it
seems so
really
like
is.
basic and overdone. But yeah,
But I
cool.
think that not enough people talk about that kind of thing. People talk about skills like be good at data, be good at customer research, be good at marketing or whatever. And they don't talk about like how you operate as a person and how you adapt and face challenges along the way. So your dad sounds like a smart guy. I should meet him one day.
I mean, he's in Florida, but by all means, do.
That's a great place to go.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? I've learned genuinely, this is something that because when I was like growing up, there was a lot of emphasis on academics, which is like skills. So no one taught me anything about neuroplasticity, emotional intelligence. Well, attitude we touched upon it, but I was like, what does it really mean? We were just like, parents even, and it's like, it's all about your attitude, and I'm still traumatized. So then you're like, you go when you grow up, then you start understanding, like, you know, when you're talking about taking initiative in your roles, and then you're like start going to career coaches, and they're like, oh, you're in your fawn stage, and you're in your fawn stage, you don't take initiative because of childhood trauma, and they're like, God, now I have to go back to deal with childhood trauma as a shrink, and it's like a whole thing. And you're like, Jesus Christ, and they just told me to get good grades. It was a lie.
Honestly, and it is like I've had the business coach, I've had therapy, like I've had all of these things, and it's like these things are interconnected. Like the way that I
Yeah.
show up in my career and the way that I deal with people and deal with stakeholders and deal with everything comes down to the way that I was like brought up as a child. So it's like you kind of have to, like, I'm not saying that everyone needs to go through that level of detail and everything, but you really do. You start to unpick your own behaviors and your own patterns, and you're like, oh, why am I being so horrible to those people? It's like, okay, light bulb moment.
Yeah, and then people are, why don't you take initiative? And I was like, well, I don't know, I'm very assertive. But then you realize it's not you, it's a specific psychological profile, and then it's just, yeah, it's like a whole thing. So I'm glad that you touched upon that. And it's nice that
Yeah.
there are people who look for that in interviews.
And it's also
Someone.
like, everyone operates in a different way. So it doesn't mean taking your initiative, doesn't mean that you go and like grab the bull by the horns and try and do everything yourself. It just means that you
Yeah.
identify something that might need to change, and then you do that in your own way that you're like comfortable in terms of your own operating style, because there's also a place for people operating in different ways. So yeah, it's a huge topic really, eh?
Hmm. I like that. So, okay, I have another long question that I wrote down. So let's consider that from a purist perspective, a PM would have like a clear product vision and follow strategy. And to reach that vision in reality can be contradictory between the stakeholders, because the strategy and what actually happens can be different. So also some companies, they don't fully empower the PM and they expect to just follow the lead of stakeholders, but then the PM is kind of responsible for making sure everything gets done, but they're not actually the person that's creating the output. I don't know if I phrased it correctly, don't shoot me.
Yeah, I'm following.
So the PM can get stressed and then they have to decide whether to follow the purist approach or to listen to people, God forbid in my case, to have an influence on their promotions and even decide if they keep their job. So I guess how would you advise people starting out to handle those situations?
No, and honestly, like, product is so political, and like you say, organizations work in that way where it is political. Like, people have got their own agendas and people want to get certain things done, which is fine, that checks out. And I don't think that, like, there's a lot of product people that go in, especially when you're young and full of enthusiasm and you want to do everything in the perfect product way, and there's probably not a single organization that does product perfectly. Like, you can sit and read all of the books and listen to all of the podcasts and learn all of the things, but it doesn't work like that in reality. So the first thing is just accepting that. And then beyond that, it's working out, and this is what I have to do all the time with people that I work with, is working out where to influence and where to have the impact. And if you've got 10 stakeholders shouting for different things and that's causing you a headache and causing you problems, well, that's where you need to influence and have an impact, is to say, well, you're all not aligned. How can I make my life easier by making sure that you guys can align yourselves at that level? And that might just be triggering conversations and speaking to upper management to get them to solve that problem. It's not necessarily yours to solve. So it's kind of picking your battles is what I'd suggest, and still not doing the right thing to get promoted, but take care of yourself. Like, if that's what you want, if you want to progress your career, then focus on that, but work out how to focus on that whilst also influencing the things that you want to and the things that frustrate you. So yeah, pick those battles, and once you've picked those battles, don't expect an overnight success. So influencing people isn't about getting them to agree to what you want to do tomorrow. It's about starting to shape processes and ways of working and conversations and things over time that then lead to that better product outcome. So people will often be on like a product transformation trajectory of like 10 years and then product's still evolving again. So if you're in your own operating sphere and you said, okay, like, I want us to get better at customer research because we're not doing that, we're just listening to stakeholders, we'll just pick one area to do some customer research in, try and influence that one space, prove that that has value, and then be able to communicate that back to people. So you can still kind of do both. You can still serve what people want from you and make some positive change, as long as you conserve your energy and don't get frustrated and don't try and do everything at once.
I love that you said that influencing people isn't getting them to agree. It's about getting them to maybe see certain value within like certain, I don't know, frameworks or cycles. And I thought that was very mature, Evie.
Thank
I feel
you.
like we could all learn from that. I'm like, influencing people is like get them to agree. I think we need to write that down on a t-shirt.
And I
Like,
also used to feel like I'd been done a terrible job if people like still didn't do what I thought was the right thing to do. And like, I'm not always right. So if I've just managed to play devil's advocate and open the conversation to consider some different angles, that's actually enough in some scenarios. So yeah, we can definitely all get t-shirts with that on.
I love that. I'm going to hold on to that. Influences people is not getting them to agree, Christine. Okay. So there are differences, I think, in product management along the product cycle. So, for example, we talked so far about going into maybe as a new person, maybe in a new company, managing a new product and getting it off the ground. What if you're managing a very mature product? So, for example, I guess Booking.com, it's a pretty established company. They have their own, I don't know, processes, whatever. From your experience, what kind of differences would a product manager managing a new product going from like 0 to 1 vary, and what skills would they need compared to the one who's already going into a role that has already a mature established product?
Yeah. So I guess there's a few different areas. Your sphere of influence when you're going from 0 to 1 is way bigger. So you're working in a smaller organization as a whole with a smaller team, and you're probably owning most of the product or the whole product. So you need to be able to look at that whole holistic product and work with your organization to be the one that's guiding the product principles, that's bringing the customer research to light, that's saying, well, this is where we need to focus to really ramp up. Whereas if you're working in a larger organization that's more established, your sphere of influence is usually on like one page of a website or one part of that page. It can be that narrow. And there's also a lot of product practices and processes that are already in place that exist at an organizational level. So actually you can have more control in focusing on that one piece really well, which might be doing customer research in that space. It might be working with your team to deliver the next thing. It might be cross collaborating with different areas of the organization. So the skill set's similar, but the way that you approach the problems and the impact that you can have will differ a lot. And I think if you're working from 0 to 1, your skill set is a lot more around being able to quickly identify the best opportunities, being able to quickly test and learn, and making sure that the things that you do really do have impact, because you don't have all of the financial backing behind you either. Like there's more pressure and it's harder to fail. Like you need to move quickly to get things right and try new things and be creative and be innovative, and you have the control over that. So potentially a bit more fast paced, potentially more of an ability to break up the rules and try new things. So that's in my mind what the difference is.
That's cool. That's also very useful. What so I also met you when you were giving a talk. Are you giving any more talks? What tell us about your consultancy? What's happening now for Evie? I like saying your name out loud.
I'm not the most organised. I'm just plugging my laptop in. So if you're like, why has she gone silent?
It's okay, Laurie.
So, yes, I did a talk at Social Code by Product, and we spoke there about the involvement of product management and what this new role looks like and how people are changing their hiring habits for product managers. I've also done a few others this year. So I spoke about product strategy and bridging the gap between strategy and delivery. And I've also done a talk where I spoke about what's really going on in your product organization, which is the theme of, oh my God, I feel so stressed. I've got a million meetings and I'm trying to fix this one hole in a bucket. But actually, the fact that the bucket's leaking in the first place and leaking in a million different areas is a problem. And there's more you can do to solve that. So and this is what I help people with from a consultancy. I help them to assess their overall product organization and where they've really actually got the challenges and how to bridge those gaps long term to allow them to be more successful in product. And that could be anything from needing to have an effective product strategy, needing to bridge that gap between strategy and delivery, needing to be able to do customer research and customer insight better, needing to focus on outcomes, needing to be able to test and learn. So yeah, there's a whole range of product problems that exist for different organizations. So yeah, that's what I'm focusing on overall. I'm working with more teams that have got product people and product managers that want to do product better, so I can come in and help them do that really, really well. And talk-wise, I am going to be speaking at ProductCamp in the Netherlands, so I'm super excited for that. First international
That's so
talk.
Cool.
Yeah, so that'll be in September, and yeah, then conference season will be kind of over, and we'll see what happens for conference season next year.
Oh my God, I love that. That's so cool. Cool. Okay. So if somebody wants to reach out, how do they get in touch with you?
So I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn at Evie Brockwell. We also have our own podcast, so we speak on Product Confidential about some of the realities of being a product manager. A lot of the things that we spoke about today, where people are trying to do things on the ground and it's really hard. And so we speak to people that are actually operating in on the ground product roles and how they've overcome those challenges. And yeah, you can also reach me by email if you want to, which is evie@eviebrockwell.com.
Oh my God. Okay, that's cool. Is there anything else that you want to share with people starting out in product that we haven't covered?
No, the only other thing I would say when people start out in product is that product management is such a vast career. There are so many different areas that you can focus on and excel in. And I think the common mistake that a lot of people make is trying to do everything and be amazing at everything all at once. So yeah, take that time if you are starting out in product to really reflect and think about what it is that you're liking and not liking about different elements of your career, and use that to inform your next moves and how you shape something that means you can excel.
Oh my God, that's so cool. That's another very useful thing. I think a lot of people underestimate that I feel like everybody does try to be really good at everything really, really quickly, and then they fail and they're like, oh yeah, it's not for me. But actually, you will be kind of not good at most things, and it kind of takes you to. There's a guy called Robert Greene who wrote a book on mastery and basically how to become an expert in your field. And he's like, there's a thing called a cycle of accelerated returns. It's almost like riding a bicycle. Like at first, you'll kind of reach like a point where you kind of enjoying it, but you're a little bit better. But then you repeat it, you become a little bit better and then better. And then there is a point where you actually become so good, you start enjoying it. But a lot of people kind of quit before they get to that point, and they think like, oh, it's not for me.
Yeah.
But I guess you just need to keep going.
No, I feel that. It happens far too often. And it's being kind to yourself and not beating yourself up about it. Like, it's seen as an opportunity to learn.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on Pranusi & Co. And we shall see you hopefully at your next speaking event in Manchester.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was great to chat.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.